Hi, everybody. Thanks, Steve, for the nice introduction. I'd also like to thank Sid and Melvika Patel and their team at IBWSS for all the work that they do to make this show possible. IBWSS and the USA Trade Tasting have become important stops on the conference circuit every year, and they provide a great opportunity for people to connect, learn, make business relationships, make personal relationships, and it wouldn't be possible without all of their hard work. So thank you. As Steve mentioned, I'm one of the two founders and also the president of Park Street. And at Park Street, we're a back office service provider for emerging and established alcoholic beverage brands. So by back office, we do everything from importing, federal and state regulatory compliance, logistics, warehousing, accounting, order fulfillment, distributor customer service, data management, and more. Really, what you might consider the most unglamorous part of the entire business. I want to get out in front of one thing, maybe three. I'm not a brand expert. I can't tell you what's going to succeed in the market. I don't know anything about production. I don't know very much about the juice that goes into the bottle on the wine or spirit side. So you might be wondering what I'm doing up here, right? I have had a good amount of experience in business building. Over the last 20 years, I've launched 4 companies, 1 an astounding failure, 1 a successful exit, and 2 going concerns, one of which is Park Street. So I personally really enjoy building businesses, and at Park Street, we really enjoy helping our clients start and grow their businesses. So that's what I'm doing up here. And as Steve mentioned, we work with over 5,000 brands from around the world. So we see an awful lot of what brands are trying, what works, what doesn't. So this presentation is designed to provide some insights and some processes that may be helpful to some of you out there, whether you're starting or trying to accelerate the growth of your businesses. And I would say, in addition to talking about starting a brand without a distillery, I'm going to expand on that just a little bit and really focus more on building businesses using an asset-light strategy. So leveraging shared infrastructure and shared services as a way to reduce costs, reduce risk, and also reduce time to market. All of which have been very successful in my career. It's something that we live by at Park Street, and we also really encourage our clients to engage in, especially on the emerging brand side. This deck is really designed more for maybe a 90-minute presentation, and we've got only, I think, 30 here. So I'm going to skip over some of the slides, but I wanted to include them in the event that the content in there is helpful to any of you. Also, I don't much care for hearing myself talk, so this is going to be relatively short, super casual. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand and interrupt as we're going through it, or ask them at the end if you like. Sound good? And also, by a show of hands, can everyone show me like what kind of segment of the business that you're in? How many people here are suppliers? Suppliers or brand owners? Okay, how about contract manufacturers? Any distributors in the house or importers? And then how about service providers like attorney, design firm, marketing firm? Okay, so there should be something in here for each of you that you may find relevant, and we'll see. So just a couple of quick kind of what this presentation does and doesn't do. This isn't a full tutorial on everything that goes into building a spirits brand. It doesn't cover all of the nuances of brown and white spirits, for instance. And it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all strategy. And it is really geared towards the US and not global markets. What it does is hopefully provide some historical context to what the value drivers are in wines and spirits. This is primarily spirits, but it's also somewhat relevant to wines. And it offers a view on the importance of intangible assets versus hard fixed assets, and kind of gives an overview of an asset-light strategy to building a spirits brand. So one thing to keep in mind is just a bit of regulatory context. The 3-tier system is based on tangible assets and not intangible assets. So if you're just a brand owner, as opposed to a distiller, for instance, and you're just owning the intellectual property, you can be in any one of these tiers, the manufacturer, supplier, the wholesaler, or the retailer. Whereas, for instance, if you own a distillery, you're locked into tier 1. And this is oftentimes a very important consideration because sometimes people want to create brands to pair with one of their existing types of asset-based entities. So it's a lot of money for bricks and mortar. Don't build a distillery until you have enough money to do it properly and enough production to put into it. This guy, while he looks like, I think, the head of Major League Baseball in the 1950s, he's not. Does anybody know who that is and why his perspective might be relevant? I would have never known this until I put this presentation together. But that's Sidney Frank, the founder of Grey Goose. And does anybody know why his context on outsourcing production might be relevant? There you go. So he founded Grey Goose in 1997, and roughly 6 years later, he had reached 1.3 million cases. And then the year following that, in 2004, he sold Grey Goose to Bacardi for over $2 billion. He had no distillery. That deal was comprised of the intellectual property and a supply agreement with a contract producer in France. Another example, also very relevant and super timely, I'm sure everyone heard about this transaction last month, was the Casamigos, launched in 2012 by friends Randy Gerber and George Clooney. By 2016, they had sold just about 70,000 cases, and then this year they sold to Diageo for $700 million up front. I did the back of the envelope calculation, and it was a 20 times revenue valuation, which is frothy even for Bay Area tech startups, right? And again, they had no distillery. Rather, the deal was comprised of the company, its intellectual property, its team members, and its supply agreement with a contract producer in Mexico, right? So these contract distillers, they're able to produce a very wide array of brands from a quality, content, pricing standpoint. They can be high, they can be low. So this, for example, you look at Clase Azul and Esperanto, our retail price maybe $79.99 a bottle. And then all the way at the bottom, you've got brands like JLP and Campo Azul, which are in maybe the $12 to $14 range. So does anybody have any idea what these brands have in common? No? What's that? Same distillery. Exactly. They're all produced at the same distillery, which, incidentally, is the same distillery that produces Casamigos, Productos Finos de Agave. So it goes to show you what you can do by leveraging the capabilities of a contract producer. Okay, so if we look across the entire value chain here, this is kind of a view of what I think the 4 major components of the value chain are and what the opportunities are for outsourcing versus building something in-house. Okay, so pretty much every one of these things, your marketing, which is your product creation, your pricing, your positioning, your placement, you can outsource it to an agency or you can do it in-house. Same thing on the production side. Determining the production location, the processes, the formula, the facility. You can use contract producers or you can build your own distillery. Same thing on the back office, which is where this is something that our firm does. As I mentioned, you've got trademarks, you've got your federal and state licenses, your state brand registrations, formula approvals, lab analysis, accounting, compliance, logistics. It sounds like a real pain, right? And then also you can do that in-house or you can use a back office provider. And then lastly, the same thing in sales. Sales to wholesalers, sales to retailers, sales to consumers. You can use a shared sales force or a network of brokers, or you can do it yourself and have your own staff. The reason I wanted to put everything on one slide is if you look at them individually, they seem like, okay, I can maybe conquer this. I can figure out my own marketing, or I can figure out my own sales. But if you look at them all together, there's an enormous amount of complexity here, an enormously steep learning curve, and just an absolute ton of work. So from our perspective, we really live by this concept of using shared resources. So for instance, we'll pick best of breed providers. We don't own warehouses. We use Western carriers in New Jersey, Western Wine in Northern California. They're the best of breed provider. They've invested in the infrastructure. They've invested in the processes. So they can deliver those storage and fulfillment services at a cost that we could never come close to and at a service level that we could never come close to. Same thing on the marketing side. Now, again, if I were starting a brand, the first thing I would do is call Steve Ray at Beverage, because he's been doing it for 30 years. So, but for me to do that, how am I going to do 30 years of learning in 6 months and think that I'm going to do as good a job as Steve can do? Same thing on the sales side. Now, some of these you may want to do in-house, but you really need to be selective. And if you're really trying to start a brand in a way that's as cost-effective as possible, you really want to consider what are those things that are not core to me as the brand owner that I can use best-of-breed shared service providers for. So when we think about launching a brand in the US, we kind of break it down into 4 segments. And again, this is the part, I'm not a brand builder, I'm not a brand expert, but we've been able to identify certain processes that we've seen over time that we think any smart brand that's trying to enter the market should go through. So the first is this phase 1, which is where you come up with what it is you're trying to do, the ideation, you put together your brand DNA and the concept behind your business. And from a timing standpoint, we would say this is 0 to 5 months. You definitely cannot do it in less than 0, right? But you can certainly spend more than 5 months on it. I think as Earl said, everything takes longer than you expect, except sex. So the second phase is the commercialization, and that's where you're really actually creating a product. You create a label, you get a bottle together, you put your formula together, and you're able to start producing product. You develop your marketing collateral, your POS materials, and then you run a test market campaign. This phase 3. Phase 2, it's impossible to launch a brand without doing phase 2 because you don't have any product. A lot of people skip over phase 3, which we think is a really bad mistake. We get clients coming into us both from the US and outside of the US, and they say, okay, I'm ready to go. I have a new brand. I've got my juice. I've got my packaging. I want to do a 40-state launch. And we say, okay, look, 40-state launch, I don't care how much money you have, you're going to run out of money trying to do a 40-state launch. Start small, start with 1 market, 1 metropolitan service area, maybe 2, maybe 3, with a limited account universe, and test your brand hypothesis and your positioning to see if you're actually reaching your target consumer and they're responding. Because if they're not, you need to make some adjustments. And if you're trying to do this in 40 markets at once, you're going to be hemorrhaging money, and it's going to be very difficult to figure out what's working and what's not, what you need to adjust. And then the last is the full launch and rollout. And we put this as ongoing because we think it's important to have a feedback loop where you're constantly getting feedback from the market so you can make adjustments. If there's slippage, if there's leakage, you can address that in order to have a tighter operation. So going through each of these, the brand DNA and business concept, and again, I see some people taking notes and pictures maybe. I'm glad to make this available. You can reach out to me or my colleague Sarah Nagel, and IBWSS also makes it available within a week or 2. So there's maybe 6 subcomponents of this phase 1. And the first, the market opportunity and target consumer, is to get a sense of what you're trying to solve for. What is your target market? Who is your target consumer? How big is it? You might say, okay, I've got an idea for an American whiskey. Well, before jumping in, you should maybe look at what's the total brown spirits market in the United States. And then of that, what segment, or how much, or how big is the American whiskey market? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Do you have a favorable industry backdrop or not? What's the competitive set? What's the pipeline look like? So you can go log on to TTB and you can see, hey, how many colas have been filed for American whiskeys in the last 6 or 12 months? Are there a lot of new entrants entering into this space, or are there not a lot of new entrants? Is it underserved? Is there maybe a market opportunity for me here? And then also figuring out who your target consumer is. What are they drinking now? Where are they drinking it? Who is selling it to them, et cetera? Because if you don't answer those questions at the outset, it becomes very difficult to do this next thing, which is putting together your brand DNA. If you consider a brand, And Steve, you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but if you consider a brand as something that's living and breathing the same as we are, we have a DNA that is our essential makeup. And if you figure out what the DNA is of your brand, everything that flows afterwards should be in support of that. Is that right? Okay, that was free. You got to call Steve for the next steps. All right, so the brand DNA are the essential values of what your brand is and stands for and how it's supposed to connect with consumers. And then you would go through a brand positioning exercise, which is maybe looking and defining who your competitive set is and how you're going to differentiate yourself from those competitors in a way that's attractive for your consumers. Next is the first wave of product development and bottle design. And this is particularly important when you're thinking of a contract producer as well, because you need to match your product and your bottle design with your contract producer capabilities. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later. But everything from the formula to the brand creation or backstory to the production location, all of these need to be decided upon such that they support what your brand DNA and your positioning is. And then the next is the high-level marketing strategy, where you figure out what tactics and strategies are you going to use to connect with consumers, what are the assets that you have that you can leverage to make those connections, and then these last two bullet points here, understanding what your unit economics are, both in the short run and the long run, and creating a target retail price that is consistent with your unit economics. And who knows what I'm talking about, unit economics? Right? Really important for your pricing. You figure out, okay, if I'm going to have a retail shelf price of X amount of dollars, off of that retail shelf price, I need to subtract the retailer margin, let's call it 30%, the distributor margin, let's call it 30%. I've got taxes and duties that need to get paid. I've got logistics, and then I've got my cost of goods, the juice, the bottle, the dry goods, and what you have left over at the end is your gross profit. And then that gross profit is what you have to invest in your sales, your marketing, your pricing support, et cetera. So it's really important that you develop that unit economics so you see what's a realistic price for you to be on the shelf. The reason we mention a difference between short and long-term unit economics is we would always encourage everybody to focus on getting traction in the market and not worry so much about your margins at the outset. Much better situation to be in that you've got traction in the market and you now want to figure out how to get some margin expansion, either by negotiating lower prices with your contract producer or some other vendors as your volume increases, or trying to take a price increase with your distributor. Much better to be in that situation than having outstanding margins and you're not moving any units. So then the last component here is putting together a business plan and a budget. Obviously, you know where you are right now. Figure out where you'd like to be. What are the objectives you're trying to accomplish, and create a roadmap getting from here to there, together with a timeline and a budget. Most important thing is matching your budget or your resources to what you're trying to accomplish in terms of your objectives. No one can buy a Porsche with Kia pricing. It just doesn't work out. So the next stage here on the commercialization, and again, these are all components that we would strongly encourage people to use shared infrastructure and expert providers. So on the bottle design, call a bottle design company, run an RFP process, leverage their skills and their expertise into helping you create the bottle that's best for your brand. And next would be product design and production. Now here's where we get back into the distiller. So you'd want to run an RFP process to select the production partner that's right for you. And that's everything from making sure that they can produce the formula that you want, that their bottling lines can handle the bottle that you want to use, that they're geographically located in a place that is consistent with your brand DNA. If you're trying to launch an island rum lifestyle brand, it may be important to have an actual distillery in the Caribbean as part of your brand story, even if you don't own it. And then lastly, this is a stage where you'd want to negotiate any marketing deals, whether it's with celebrity endorsers, key influencers, associations, et cetera. And then next is the creative and communication, where you take your brand DNA and your positioning and you translate it into an actual communication strategy. Again, something that works really well to use an outsourced agency for. You're the driver, you're in charge, but you leverage their skills, their expertise, their relationships. They have produced POS material or worked with POS vendors over the course of their careers. You haven't, most likely, unless you're an expert at this. But even if you have, it's a way that you can offload some components of the heavy lifting of the brand creation. And then next is the back office setup. That's figuring out what you're going to do. Are you going to build out your own regulatory compliance capabilities so you know how to do price posting, formula approvals, brand registrations, that you're going to get all of the licenses that are required in all of the markets that you want to sell into? Or are you going to use an outsourced back office platform like ours or someone else's? And then lastly, you take the learning that you've done in phase 1 and phase 2, and you update your marketing plan based on what you've gone through in the commercialization process. And now this is the part that I'd like to talk the most about, at least towards the end here, which is the test market campaign. So many people overlook this one, and it's really, in our opinion, the most valuable part of the process, because you're testing your hypotheses about your brand DNA, but also you're testing your marketing plan, your marketing tactics, your pricing, et cetera. So you want to pick 1, 2 markets, whatever it is, and create a small universe of test accounts. Determine what mix is going to be between on-premise, off-premise, large accounts, small accounts, ethnic accounts, non-ethnic, et cetera. And then you put a micro marketing plan together to attack those accounts in a 3, 6, 9-month period, whatever it is. And that's an opportunity for you to activate accounts and also get reorders, which are super important in determining whether your business is going to work and is doing well. You need to create an organizational setup that's going to allow you to support your activities in the test market phase. So you're going to need to hire some people. You may need to run some more RFP processes to determine what sales agents or brokers or promotional agencies you want to use in this process, or whether you're going to hire key personnel to do it yourself. And then the most important part of this most important phase is creating a short feedback loop so you know what's actually happening, what's working, what's not, and determining in advance the metrics that are going to tell you whether or not you're succeeding. So you may say, okay, in my test market program, I want to activate 50 accounts, and I want to do 50 tastings during that period. And of the 50 tastings, I want 500 people to get exposure to my brand. Of the 500, I want 200 to actually taste it. Of the 200, I want 25 to buy it. Right? And you also capture their feedback on the actual on-premise events, or off-premise, as the case may be. Based on that learning, update your business plan, build out your organizational setup and support so you're ready to do your full launch and your rollout. Hopefully, you're just updating your business plan after your test market campaign and not going back and retooling your bottle, changing your label, changing your formula, et cetera. However, if you think about it, and you have to change your bottle, your label, your formula, your packaging, whatever it is, you're much better off doing it at the end of phase 3 before you start phase 4, as opposed to doing it 6 months into a 20-market launch. These are a few different distributor options and just some notes on top-tier suppliers or top-tier distributors that work with the major suppliers, second-tier distributors, clearing distributors. We're a clearing distributor in New York, New Jersey, Florida, and California. So a lot of emerging brands use us to test their proposition in the market by selling directly to retailers. The key takeaway from this slide, though, is no matter whether you go with the largest distributor or a very small one, or even use a clearing distributor like Park Street, you have to support your brand in the market. You have to help the retailers sell your product because nobody else is going to. You have to help your brand connect with consumers. So again, this is this concept of helping the retailers win. The hardest thing that you're going to do once you're launching in the test market or the full market, in our opinion, is selling in, getting an account to actually place an order. That's going to be the hardest thing that you're going to do until you try and get reorders. And then that's going to become the most important thing. I'm sorry, the hardest thing. But it's also the most important, because it's one thing to sell product into an account, but it's something totally different to have that account place a follow-on order for your product, because that means they were able to move it off of their floor and they're interested in taking more of it. The way you can help, some of the ways you can help retailers win: in-store tastings, buybacks, managed bar nights, really important, should definitely be part of your plan and your budget. And now we're back to this concept of outsourcing not just your production, but also your front office versus your back office activities. So the front office activities are everything that you can think of: selling into your distributor, working with your distributor, pricing support and programming, soliciting demand at retailers, reaching out, consumer promotions and consumer marketing. And the back office are all the things that I had described earlier that we do. And you got to figure out whether you're going to bundle these things, whether you're going to do them in-house, or whether you're going to outsource them. A bundled model, the very large suppliers, they do everything in-house in a bundled model. It works great for them. It's extraordinarily expensive. It takes a very long time to build up and support that type of platform. So for most new market entrants, that's not really a great option. The bundled approach in an agency environment is one that was very popular and is not so much in vogue anymore. You see a lot of unbundling, as Steve had talked about earlier. And we represent an unbundled route to market. So you can see that these are several clients of ours where some of them do their own front office in-house, some of them outsource it, but they all outsource their back office. They believe, again, taking advantage of economies of scale and shared infrastructure, that they're able to focus on what they want to focus on, sales and marketing, and allow the back office to run in the background at a much lower cost and a much higher service level than if they were doing it themselves. So just to kind of wrap up here, we're just about done. On the overall, some of the pros and cons on an asset light versus an asset heavy type of setup. Less capital intensive on the asset light side, easier to pivot in case your initial value proposition turns out to not be valid. Nothing wrong with pivoting. It really reduces your time to market. And you also lower your execution risk. If you're with a production partner who's been doing this for a really long time and has an existing infrastructure, more likely than not, they're going to be better at executing the production than you are. And then that feeds into this last thing, which is it really reduces the complexity of the learning curve, because you're leveraging not just the physical assets of their distillery, but all of the experience that they have producing for all of the years and all of the clients that they're in business with. Now, on the other side, you can see that there are some advantages of a distillery-based strategy. It does work for a lot of brands to help create the authenticity of the story, that you have a master distillery or a master distiller who built the distillery. All of the product is produced there. There's no dependency on a third party. There's oftentimes a physical presence, whether it's a tasting room or distillery tours, which are very helpful in the marketing process. And then lastly, you have some proprietary assets or processes which potentially can create barriers to competition and also provide some valuation enhancement at a time of exit. And here are just some examples of contract producers on the left and some brands that have owned or affiliated distilleries. And these are all clients of ours as well. So I think that's really about it. Does anybody have any questions? Please.
Can you elaborate a bit on the shared sales concept?
Sure. So there's a couple of different models on that one. So there are local or regional brokers who maybe handle one market, one metropolitan service area, or one state. There are regional brokers who have multi-state coverage, and then there are some what we would call third-party outsourced sales providers who maintain a major market national footprint. So what we see a lot of clients doing is they will maybe start by outsourcing everything, and as the brand starts to take off, they'll maybe hire their own in-house people in key markets and take those markets away from the shared sales force, or they'll stay with them. It really depends. The most important thing in using a shared sales force is aligning the interests between the brand owner and the sales force. Sales force wants very high retainer and very low numbers for bonuses. Brand owners want no retainer and very high numbers to pay out on success. But it's about getting something that's reasonable and in the middle. We tell our clients that we're referring to sales companies, don't go in there and tell them you don't want to pay anything and everything's success-based only, because you're going to lose all credibility. And we tell the shared sales resources to whom we refer clients, be reasonable about your fixed retainer. In order to get this business, you have to prove that you're able to move the units. So it's a little bit of a balancing act. And then the other important component is making sure that the other products in the sales force's portfolio are some kind of match with your brand. Certainly can't be competitive, but if you've got an urban cognac on one hand and a millennial suburban vodka on the other hand, there's just not a lot of overlap on the accounts that they would be calling on, so it's really not such a great fit. Please.
On the marketing side, can you recommend some good resources, online or otherwise, for market and consumer research?
Market and consumer research.
Determining who is my target customer, what's their price point, the things you were talking about earlier. There's good places to get that data.
So I would say that Nielsen has that data. They provide some of it gratis to get started. The scan data costs an absolute fortune, right? And I don't think that's what you'd be looking for. IBWSS that we did the craft spirits data project with, right? So they're another one. Let me give you my card, and I will get back to you with some other ideas. Again, that's not the segment that I'm really in every day, so I would have to check on that one, but I'm more than happy to do it.
One more question?
Easy. Okay, thanks, everybody. Oh, sorry.
Great presentation, thank you. You mentioned early on in your presentation there was some IP associated with the sale of Casa Vivas.
Yes.
What is the IP associated with this?
I will show you right here. See that logo in the middle of the slide there? So literally the intellectual property of the brand and the formula. So even when you're working with a contract producer, you can create some proprietary non-tangible assets for your business in the form of your formula and production processes. So it's not that, hey, I'm using a third-party distillery, I don't have any IP around my actual product. You can, and it can be proprietary. But for that one, it was the formula and the brand. Great. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.